one more time, I want to pass it over to Yusuf Rob, who will take over the debate from here.
Can everyone hear me?
No.
Can you all hear me now? Yes. All right. Are we ready to repeal and replace Congressman Steve Knight?
Yes.
Okay. Tonight's debate, as you know, is brought to you by the Democratic Club of the High Desert. They have promulgated the questions. They have also selected the questions proposed by members of this community. We have 5 sections tonight. I will go through the details of all of those sections as they begin. As Brian said, we want to keep this moving. We want to refrain from applauding for each and every answer that our candidates give. But now is your chance to applaud loud and proud for all the candidates and the candidates of your choice as I call them out one by one in a randomly drawn order. And keep in mind that all of our ordering here tonight has been random. We are neutral in this race, except when it comes to Steve Knight. So without further ado, first up, Jess Phoenix. Please welcome Brian Caforio. And last but not least, Katie Hill. Our first section tonight is opening statements from each candidate. Each candidate will have a maximum of 3 minutes for their opening statement. But I would advise when it comes to opening statements and all of your statements here tonight, you don't have to take them all the time unless you really find it necessary. And with that, again, in randomly chosen order, we will start 3 minutes. Katie Hill.
Right. Well, first of all, I want to say thank you so much to all of you who are here, all the volunteers, and the people who put this together, because this is really incredible, and it's such a representation of the movement that you all are building. I'm honored to be up here with Jess and with Brian, because no matter what our differences might be, we can all agree that this is the year that Steve Knight has to go. The reason I'm running is because this is the community I love. I've spent my entire life in the 25th District. I grew up in the Antelope Valley, moved to Santa Clarita when I was 11, and have spent my career working with the most vulnerable people in our communities. I ran the largest homeless services organization in California called PATH, with about a $50 million a year annual budget, literally helping thousands of individuals, veterans, and families move off the streets into permanent homes every single year. But one day, after the election, I woke up and said, this political system is broken, and we can't stand by any longer and let that happen. For too long, our representatives in Washington have put the interests of their corporate donors, their wealthy individual donors, and the special interest groups that talk to them every single day, and partisan politics, all of that, before the true needs of the people they're supposed to represent. And that has to change. And I know that with you, all helping make it happen, we're going to do just that. Thank you.
Next up is Jess Phoenix.
So as our wonderful moderator just said, I'm Jess Phoenix. I'm assuming you knew that. So what I'd like to do is actually ask everybody here to raise their hand who's had more than one job in their life. Okay, that's pretty good, me too. The reason I'm asking is because you know I'm a scientist. You know I'm not a politician. I wouldn't be running. I wouldn't be here talking to you if it weren't for the fact that what we have in office right now, from the federal level down to a lot of our local offices, is just unacceptable. We have somebody representing us, and I use the term representing loosely, who is basically voting counter to our community's interests time and time again. And we see so much tribalism and partisanship in our politics these days that we can't have career politicians running things anymore. We have to take people who have a genuine passion for making their communities better and help elevate them. So that is why I'm running. And I can tell you what I believe in. I think that's a bit more important than rehashing my bio again. I'm assuming most of you have seen it. If you haven't, go visit my website, Just 2018, check it out afterwards. But In the meantime, I want to tell you that I believe in getting big money out of politics, big money out of government. That is a very firm belief that I've only come to hold more firmly from running. I also believe in term limits. I don't think our elected representatives should have the option of making it a career and becoming so entrenched that they lose touch with our communities. And I also believe that we need to eliminate gerrymandering and use science and math to make districts that actually make sense. So those are things that I believe in very firmly, and we need to do better than Steve Knight, who mocks millennials by joking about avocado toast while ramming tax cuts that nobody wanted down our throats. So what I'm really here to do is recognize the two worlds that people, particularly in the Antelope Valley, straddle. We cross two tectonic plates here. The San Andreas Fault runs right through the middle. Again, geologist. And we also have people here who are native Californians, people who've moved here from around the country and around the world. We have people who live here and work here, and people who work in LA and live up here. So we are all bridging a divide, and we need representation that can bridge a divide even better, the divide that exists between government and all of us. And that's what I want to do, and that's why I'm here to, working to earn your votes, working to be the representative that California's 25th needs and deserves. Thanks.
And finally, Brian Pretorian.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. It's great to see this many people, this much energy, especially on the first day of March Madness. I hope your bracket's not already busted like mine. I grew up in Southern California. My parents were both public school teachers. My mom is here tonight. She taught special education and elementary school. My dad was a high school English teacher. I went to public schools my whole life up until getting an academic scholarship to UCLA, where I met my wonderful wife, Lisa, who's also here. And I got a lot of guiding principles from my family and from my grandpa, who was a pastor, whose overarching guiding principle was the golden rule. And that's how I tried to live my life. And so it's why in high school and at UCLA, I spent my time tutoring people who were struggling to get ahead. It's why when I went to Yale Law School, I represented immigrant tenants who were dealing with some really bad landlords who were trying to shut off their heat or jack up their rent in the middle of a freezing Connecticut winter. It's why it was so disheartening when I clerked for a federal judge on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and I saw how absolutely broken our criminal justice and immigration systems are, how they disproportionately affect people of color and destroy families and communities. It's why it was so frustrating practicing law and seeing firsthand the corporate assault on working families. And it was just every single step along the process, seeing elected officials who aren't looking out for a community. And it's so aggravating. And it goes right to the absolute top. Because I'll tell you somebody who didn't get those same guiding principles from his family, and that's Donald Trump, who is a despicable human being, who is he's a sexual predator, he's a pathological liar, he uses the office of the presidency as a personal ATM machine, he obstructs justice, and I believe represents a clear and present threat to the future of our democracy and our republic. And I am prepared to use my skills and experience clerking for a federal judge, studying the Constitution, to hold him accountable each and every time he breaks the law. But it's not just Donald Trump. We have a broken system in Washington. We have special interests that wield way too much power. We are having a full-on war waged by corporations against everyday Americans. You see it with Equifax, with payday lending, with the rollback of net neutrality and internet privacy, with the recent Janus Supreme Court case that is just a war on working families and unions. We need people in office who are going to fight for people in the community, who are going to get Medicare for all, common sense gun measures to save lives, stand with Planned Parenthood, combat climate change and offshore drilling, protect Social Security and Medicare, get a solution to DACA, and so much more. So thank y'all for being here. I'm excited for a debate coming up.
25th Congressional District. Each candidate will have 2 minutes max to answer. If something was said that you want to rebut to and you don't want to do it during that answer, raise your hand, and we'll give a 1-minute rebuttal to one individual candidate that you may have disagreed with, and then that person will have a 30-second rebuttal. And with that, for the question, we'll first go to Jess Phoenix, As we heard earlier, Steve Knight voted to repeal the ACA, and the tax bill that passed actually repealed key components of it. What are you going to do, if you want to, and we would hope you would, to protect and improve the Affordable Care Act?
So I think it's something that we definitely need to work on, and we need to shore it up. I would actually prefer to have us move towards a Medicare for All system. I've mentioned that before on the campaign trail many, many times, but I don't think we're going to get there overnight. We need to, obviously right now, protect the most vulnerable folks who are at risk of losing their insurance. So what I could do on day one, essentially, and Congress, is to introduce legislation that would regulate the prices that pharmaceutical companies are allowed to sell their drugs for. In other words, put a ceiling on the amount of an increase that they can do at once. For example, Valiant Pharmaceuticals raised the price of a drug that helps people who can't produce copper naturally in their own bodies. They raised the price of that drug by 10,000%. I'm not making that up, that's an actual thing. And they took a drug that was $30 a month and made it so that it cost $300,000 annually. That is insane. I don't know anybody here who could afford that. So I think one of the ways that we work on getting our out-of-control healthcare costs, to a more reasonable level is by first stopping the price gouging that we're seeing from the big pharma companies. And that is something that's simple, it's easy to control, and it's government's job to make sure that the regular people are not getting gouged. And so that is one thing that I want to do right away, day one. It's an action we can take, and it will help people who are at the risk of being, having their prices raised because the drug that they take doesn't have a generic. I don't know about you, but I have to take certain drugs that don't have generic alternatives. So you're stuck with that one manufacturer. If they raise the price, it's a really bad deal for everyone. So I think that, to me, that is the single first most important step that we can take to protect the Affordable Care Act and the people who rely on affordable health care just to live.
Thank you. Brian Caforio.
I agree with just about everything Jess just said right there. What Trump and Knight have done to healthcare over the last year is a really frustrating thing. I was meeting with a family just earlier this week who are on an Alzheimer's board here because the wife suffers from Alzheimer's, and they met with Congressman Knight in his office last year and asked him, will you vote to repeal the ACA? And he said to their face, no, I will not do that. And then, of course, he went and did just that, putting the care at risk for tens of thousands of us here in this district, millions of people across the country. And that's what's so frustrating when we have these politicians who will just lie about their positions, who hope you don't find out the truth, and we need to change that. And so I also believe we need to have Medicare for All. Seeing what happened over the last year with how fragile the Affordable Care Act is, such that one president can sabotage it by taking away the individual mandate or by messing with the market, with the vote coming down to a few senators, we can't have something so fragile. We need to have a permanent, strong solution that can't be dismantled so easily. So that's why I want Medicare for All. So no person has to decide whether to feed their family or get prescription medicine. As Jess talked about, the prices are out of control. The government could start negotiating drug prices tomorrow, and it would save us $800 billion over the next 10 years. We could do that if pharmaceutical companies didn't have so much influence in Congress. So we need to get those people who are bought and controlled by pharmaceutical companies, by oil companies, by insurance companies, get them out of office, get common sense people in there who are going to fight for the community and actually get every single person health care, because it is our fundamental right as Americans to have that.
And Katie Hill.
Yeah, so this is something that's particularly personal to me. Many of you might have heard my story. My husband, who's here tonight, we were in a period where he didn't have health insurance. We were not married yet. It was a very short time that we thought he's 26. He's a healthy, safe person. That it would be okay, right? But it wasn't, and he ended up getting a spontaneous pneumothorax on the very short period when he was not covered. He waited to go into the doctor because we knew that any kind of doctor's bills were going to be too much for us to afford. Ultimately, after 3 days of barely being able to breathe and not being able to walk up a flight of stairs, he went into this free clinic. It was actually a Sam Dixon clinic, and they told him that his lung had 100% collapsed and he needed to go to the emergency department right away. So that's what he did, and he was there for 11 days, had emergency surgery, and we ended up $200,000 in debt and had to move back in with his parents, postpone our wedding, and start our lives in a way that we never could have expected. This is the reality for countless Americans, even still today, because we have insurance right now that is simply unaffordable for too many people. Even if we've got so much improvement since the ACA took effect, but too many people still choose not to buy insurance because they can't afford the hundreds of dollars a month and the thousands of dollars in deductibles that they would face and still be dealing with their day-to-day expenses. So we do have to get to Medicare for all, but the real question is how we do it. And as someone who worked extensively on the Medicaid expansion that happened here in California, I literally helped with the enrollments of the tens of thousands of formerly homeless and currently homeless individuals to get onto the Medicaid, the newly expanded Medi-Cal program here. I know that takes work, and some of the things we need to be looking at are doctor shortages. We have 100,000 doctor shortage right now. Every single person's going to need a primary care doctor. When we passed Medicare in the first place, we had investments in nursing and in doctor programs and to ensure that we had the workforce to sustain it. So those are the kinds of things that we need to start taking steps on right now to plan for a future when every single person does have coverage. Thank you.
Our next question is on taxes, everyone's favorite subject. As I think most people know here in this room, the GOP just enacted their version of tax reform. If you guys succeed in displacing Steve Knight, you may be in the position to write your own tax reform bill. Perhaps it would be different. How specifically would you make it different? And how would any cuts be paid for so as not to explode the deficit, which the GOP bill does to the tune of $1.5 trillion? We'll start with Brian Kerforia.
Yeah, the GOP bill is terrible. It just shows a real misplaced priorities. You got $1.5 trillion giveaway to the biggest banks, the wealthiest corporations, and the wealthiest people, while the rest of us are left with very little. That's the wrong priority. And so what I would like to see on a corporate level is move to an income tax system similar to the way that the state of California does it, where it prevents companies, multinational companies, that put all of the local mom and shop pops at a competitive disadvantage. It taxes you based on the profit made in the actual region, the sales made, the services provided. So a company can't say, oh no, the patent is held in Northern Ireland and that's where all the profit is. No, if you sold that product in California or anywhere in the United States, you pay taxes on that. This takes away the incentive to take your company, your workers and your space overseas, and it actually incentivizes you to have it here because people can't give up the United States market. This is going to benefit all of the small businesses who only have a location in the United States, and it's going to put us on an even playing field so that the Apples and Walmarts and Exxon Mobils of the world aren't able to pay zero taxes each year. And then when it comes to income, we need to have a progressive tax system such that nobody who is making millions or billions of dollars a year is paying a lower percentage. So on Social Security, we got to scrap the tax. We got to scrap the cap on the Social Security tax so that we shore up that system for decades into the future. It would just have people pay the same percentage of their income in Social Security taxes as everybody else does, but it would shore up that system so we all have Social Security for decades in the future.
Thank you, Katie Hill.
Yeah, there's absolutely no question that the current tax plan is an utter sham, and it's going to be one of the big messes that we're going to have to clean up as soon as we get into office. My proposal, which I've put out there for consideration previously, but is to exempt the first $10,000 from income tax for anybody. That's across the board. That's to give immediate cushion for people who are making the lowest amounts, but it's also equitable. We need to close loopholes for the wealthiest people here, and the 1% have been paying such a small fraction in proportion to what they represent within our communities. We need to make that equitable, and that part of that means that we need to tax capital gains at a standard rate because so many of those extremely wealthy people are living off of interest income, and that's not taxed in the standard way right now. So we need to change that. We should be getting, as Brian mentioned, getting rid of the cap on Social Security taxes. When I realized that was in place, that completely blew my mind when I was an employer at PATH. And finally, we should be taxing large corporations based on their global net income. Not just, again, like not the income that they can just declare as being here, but what they are raising elsewhere. So that is something that has been proposed by Robert Reich and many others, and I look forward to working on that.
Jess Phoenix.
So I think the number one thing that we need to realize with any taxes that we implement on our citizens is that taxes need to be revenue neutral, they need to be equitable, and they need to be simple. So we have none of these things right now. We have a tax code that is essentially a nightmare. We just filed ours this week, and it's not exactly fun. Plus, we all know that the GOP tax bill that is now in effect is actually going to only cause a bit of temporary relief for a lot of folks, rather than any long-term, lasting change. And instead, we bailed out corporations from, in the 30% what they had to pay down to 21%. I mean, these corporations are paying all-time lows in their taxes. So we really need to make sure that we're advancing tax policy that puts the burden less on individual people and more on corporations, because what they are doing is profiting. Individuals are just attempting to live and survive. So I would want to first pursue any kind of tax policies, weigh them very carefully to make sure that what we're doing is putting the burden on the profit-generating folks. Not to the point where they can't make any profit, because we're still a capitalist society, but we do need to prioritize making sure that people, like the people in our community whose average net income is $68,000, we need to make sure that our communities have enough money to pay for essential services, to make sure that kids get good educations and that everybody has a way to get to work and to pay for their health care, which we shouldn't even have to. I want to add that in there. But I want to make sure that our tax policy, again, is very progressive and fairly burdens people. And so I actually am very interested in looking at flat taxes, not necessarily as the end-all be-all, but I think that is more of the solution, where you're going to see an equitable division of how people pay. And of course, you're going to need tons of nuance in where you cap it, where you start it, but making sure that people at the lowest end of the income earning spectrum are not unfairly burdened has to be key.
Thank you very much. Our next category is given an economic opportunity. And I want the candidates to be very specific here, because it's going to be a pretty general question, but there are specific things that I want to hear from each of you so we know how you're different. Our nation today faces record low unemployment. Not that it has anything to do with Mr. Trump, but we'll agree with him on that one fact. But underemployment is on the rise. Pay and benefits are on the decline. We are facing a shrinking middle class. How would you restore and grow that essential middle class, specifically Katie Hill?
Right. So it starts with looking at the industries that are the most appropriate and most viable here in our own communities. We need to develop public-private partnerships like the ones that we have had here for a long time that have helped the Antelope Valley become what it is. But we also need to look at the new industries, whether that's green energy or even the cannabis industry that is newly legal and is coming into play. Because ultimately it has to be focused on how do we create jobs that are good paying jobs that stay here in our own communities. And without that critical final piece, then nothing else matters. Huge part of that involves partnering with labor and making sure that the employees are fairly represented. It means having project labor agreements to ensure that there are standards before a project is even put underway. And it's really, we have to recognize that the middle class was built on unions. My family was longtime union members, and that's what allowed us to grow and thrive and get into the middle class. And we've seen that be cut over and over and over again. And getting back to that place, ensuring that we're able to lift people up from no matter where they came from, give them the opportunities to thrive in our communities is going to be key.
Thank you. Jess Phoenix.
So many of you have probably been familiar with my platform, which is to make our community a global hub for green tech research and development. We have all of the tools we need here to create and grow good middle class jobs for decades to come. We're facing a growing risk of losing a lot of jobs to automation. And it's already happening. It's already here. This isn't 5 years from now or 10 years from now. They actually had a hamburger flipping robot do a trial in Pasadena March 5th. It actually got fired because it was too efficient for the humans to keep up. So we are there. The robots are here. So we need jobs that are going to be unable to be exported. And we have such a long history of aerospace and manufacturing here that shying away from that and turning to something completely different is not wise. So we need to use the skills that we have right here, the space that we have right here, and the engineering ingenuity that we have in our community, as well as the design. We've got a lot of really talented people in a lot of different areas who are here and are hungry for jobs. So I really want to make sure that we bring an institution of higher education here locally. The UC, they wanted to bring a UC satellite campus here, and that was actually stalled in the Appropriations Committee at the state level. So I would want to be a strong advocate to bring a CSU or a UC here, because we need to have the programs that are going to train people, both vocationally and academically, to make a difference and to be ready for that green tech revolution that I see coming down the pipeline. And I want us to be at the vanguard of that. I think we can, and I think we should. And I think it's also smart from an investment perspective on a nationwide level to invest in green tech. The United States can and should be and must be a leader in sustainable technologies, in renewable energies. And I think we here in the Antelope Valley, Lancaster's leading the way. I mean, they have such an innovative clean power scheme. They have a fantastic system with the buses, and they're replacing all the streetlights with LEDs. They are showing us what we can do, so let's do it.
Right before you.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential. You know, here in the Antelope Valley, Aerospace Valley, we need to make sure we're doing everything possible to keep that industry thriving and make sure that the jobs are going to local people. And so I want to make sure we're investing in internship programs, apprenticeship programs, vocational training programs. You know, I'm very proud to be endorsed by the United Aerospace Workers who recognize that I have a vision for making sure that when we're building, you know, the machines of the future, every space shuttle that was ever built was built right here in the Antelope Valley, that those jobs aren't going to people who are moving in from South Carolina, but they're going to our kids who go through our schools and have the training in order to get them. We also really need to take a lead in infrastructure right now. I don't know how many of you saw the bridge collapse in Florida today. It's horrible. That's happening. We have crumbling roads, crumbling bridges. It's not just a phrase, it's happening. And so I want to sit on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, make sure I have a seat at the table, so when we get that big plan finally through that both sides keep talking about, that actually is going to be invested in our region. We are a commuting district. We need to improve our transportation. We have really bad and slow broadband internet access here. We can improve on that. Yeah, you know, we can improve on that. That helps recruit other job creators here, because without the internet, as we go into the future, job creators don't want to be here. But if we have an investment from the federal government into our infrastructure, we can make this a better place for jobs. And we have to improve our education. We've got to make sure we're increasing the STEAM education, that kids from a very young age, all the way up through high school and beyond, are able to get the training they need for those jobs in the future. There's no doubt that automation is coming. It is going to dramatically alter our economy, and we need to be preparing in advance so that we aren't caught off guard when it happens.
Thank you. We're going to mix it up a little bit. We all want to get home in time for Sports Center. So the next three questions are just going to be asked to one candidate, and that one candidate only will be responsible for answering it. So the other two can shut off their brains for a second if they want. Our first question is to Jess Phoenix, and these questions were topics that the board wanted to make sure were asked, but we're just trying to get through it. So no particular rationale or randomly picked. Jess Phoenix, what is the greatest national security threat facing the United States, and why is it worse than others?
Okay.
Well, 2 minutes.
Okay, I like this question because I've actually been harping on this for years now. Many of you know my parents were both FBI agents, so our dinner time conversations were literally about national security threats. And my mom's a terrorism expert, and she also does foreign counterintelligence work. Well, she did. They're both retired. My dad was a white-collar crime, and then gang crime, and then ended up doing cybercrime expert. So that's what he and my mom did. And so I grew up hearing about threat multipliers and preparedness and readiness, and then I went into natural hazards as a field of study. So my expertise is in dealing with natural hazards. So the interesting thing, working in the natural hazards community, working in the preparedness and security community, and talking with folks I know via the Department of Defense, it's clear the greatest national security threat facing our country is climate change. And I say this say that, and I am completely unafraid to say that. I will say that as loud and as long as it takes, because even Republicans know that climate change is real. Trump's application to build a seawall around his Scottish property said because of sea level rise due to climate change. So everybody knows it's real. Steve Knight knows it's real, but they are beholden to big money donors. So we need to get them out, and we need people in office who understand that threat multipliers mean that climate change is going to impact food security. There are places in Africa where the water is drying up now, and so terrorism is taking hold. That is a realistic thing. It is true, and it is happening. We also are going to see migration at higher levels and people who are more desperate because they can't find work, because they can't live in safety, because they don't have the same lifestyle that they used to, that their parents had. So what do? We adapt. We adapt or die. And that is what the message that I want to take to Congress is. We take this seriously, we listen to what the DOD is saying, and we prepare, because this is something we can work on. We can actually make a difference and make this threat a lot less scary.
Next question is to Brian Caforio. Federal gas taxes, it's a problem. They're on the decline. They haven't been raised in a while, and we have increasing mileage and increasing number of electric and other alternative vehicles. How do we fully fund federal roads and infrastructure projects like the ones you mentioned in the future when the revenue stream is declining?
Yeah, the problem with federal gas taxes or local gas taxes, it really hurts and hits the wrong people the hardest. And we right here in this district know that more than anybody else. Because we're a commuting district, and it really, really hits us hard. What we need to do is shift the priorities and look at, a Wall Street speculation tax, where you could put a very, very small percentage on Wall Street high-frequency trading, and that would bring in untold billions of dollars. If you look at the tax bill that the GOP just put forward, Steve Knight, Donald Trump, the rest of the Republicans found $1.5 trillion that they were comfortable giving away to banks, corporations, and millionaires and billionaires. That $1.5 trillion could have been invested in our roads, our bridges, our broadband internet. The resources are out there. We just need to make sure that we are shifting the priorities and recognizing that instead of giving these giant windfalls to people and companies who don't need them, we put those resources into our community in a way that will really move our economy forward. That's how we came out of World War II. That's what Dwight Eisenhower did with a massive infrastructure program that made America the best place to do business in the world, that allowed people to get into the middle class, and it really pushed us forward for decades to come. We need to get back to that.
Katie Hill, the congressional budget, always a mess, perhaps a mess even greater now thanks to this tax bill. If you're elected to Congress, whether your party is in the majority or not, how would you get your priorities through? What would those priorities be, and how would they be put through? Because let's be honest, there's a GOP problem in Washington. There's also a Washington problem in Washington. So what would your approach be, and what would your top funding priorities be?
Sure. Well, to start, let's talk about what the congressional budget looks like, and the fact that the process is supposed to be something that happens with a budget bill, a budget appropriate, oh my gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, one bill that starts it to set the total amount for discretionary spending, and then 12 appropriations bills that are brought through the Appropriations Committee, and from there it's reconciled with the Senate, and the Senate, the two versions are brought together, and it's supposed to go to the President for signature. That never happens, and so instead we end up with this process of an omnibus bill that's shoved through at the very end, or what's worse is these continuing resolutions that we've been living off of for the last several years, moving us from crisis to crisis to crisis, and never really looking at the underlying issues within a budget. Where the advocacy starts has to be twofold. It has to come from, these are the funding priorities within each of those 12 budget resolutions that are supposed to, or budget, the budget bills, the appropriations bills that are supposed to be happening. We have to, that's where you have an opportunity to advocate. Priorities for me would be in housing and economic opportunities. That's huge for us here. We need to really invest in healthcare in a major way. And I would want to work with the committee members so that I could have an input and influence with them as those priorities are discussed. But in order for that to matter at all, we have to have a Congress that is functional. I ran a $50 million a year organization's budget. We had to do a budget process every single year, and that process looked very different because we were actually delivering on time and we're managing to that budget. And frankly, this is the most important budget, if not just here in our country, in the world. And if we can't get that right, then we have the wrong members of Congress.
Thank you. We're going to go back now to asking questions to be answered by each of the candidates. Again, 2 minutes for the answer. And if you guys want a rebuttal to mix it up, raise your hand and let me know. I've never met Steve Knight. I have met Pete Knight. And regardless of what you think of his politics, he flew really damn fast. I think he was the fastest man alive and might still be. So this is an aerospace town. And if you're elected, what would you do to support the signature industry? And specifically, what military and also civilian programs would you advocate for? There's many on the books right now. We're going to start with Brian Caforio.
Yeah, so I talked about this a little bit earlier when just talking about how to improve middle-class life, because it is such an important part of this community, of this district. Right now, and by the way, you are correct, Pete Knight still is the fastest man ever to travel. But we have to make sure that when this long-range bomber, which is going to be built here in Palmdale and is going to provide billions of dollars in economic generation to this community or to this area for the decades into the future, that those jobs are going to people from this community. It's estimated that the numbers go back and forth, but to create between 3,000 and 6,000 jobs in this area. But I don't want those jobs going all to people who move in from Texas or from South Carolina who have the necessary security clearances, who take those jobs away from people here. So we need to make sure that we are training people here, young people now, because these jobs are going to be here for decades. Get the education all the way through high school, after high school, with vocational training, with apprenticeships, with internships, so they are ready to get those jobs and have a lifetime worth of a career. We can do that. We need to get the security clearance process moving quicker. Right now, there is a massive backlog. I have talked to a lot of people in this community who have jobs available to them. If they can just get through the process, it's backed up more than a year right now, and it's preventing people in our community from getting those good, well-paying jobs. So we focus on that, we train kids, we get the security clearances, and we make sure that we continue to attract the brightest minds in aerospace to this community so that whatever investments the United States is making in aerospace exploration going forward, they're doing it in the Antelope Valley, as they have been doing it for 70 years and longer.
Now, are those people who need security clearances, could they get employed in the White House?
You don't need them there if you're related to the president.
Katie Hill, you're up.
Sure. I actually come from an aerospace family, and I lived right next to Edwards Air Force Base. My grandfather worked on the space shuttle in the Apollo series. My stepdad, who's here tonight, spent much of his career working on the B-51 and the B-2 bombers. And so programs like this have had a direct impact on my life in fundamental ways. But we do absolutely have to ensure that those programs are continuing to come to this community and that the jobs go to people who are in this community. There's pathways that we can create in that way to ensure that the education is happening here and that it's in partnership with the corporations that have the jobs, that they are recruiting and retaining people who are from our community and who are educated through our system. That goes back to what kind of an education system we have. We've got Antelope Valley College, which is incredible and doing some incredible programs, but we need more. We need more specialized training to get people to these advanced degrees that they need in order to qualify for the really high-paying jobs. I mean, I met with Northrop last year, and they said that so many of the jobs end up coming from commuters from Long Beach and elsewhere. As for the security clearance process, we were overseeing that process for our contractors that worked, the PATH staff that were
special skill sets and are local. And that is something as a congressperson we can actually affect. So that is what we need, is a congressperson who says, I'm going to go to bat for this, and I'm going to go and advocate that we set our federal budget such that it actually supports defense and aerospace and green tech and manufacturing, the things that are economic drivers of our country. And then for our veterans communities, we were actually talking about that, and nobody had mentioned it just yet, but you mentioned military in the question. We need to make sure that we are working to build a VA hospital here in the Antelope Valley so that our veterans can get the care they need without having to drive to Westwood, which is just obscene. And we also need to provide educational and job opportunity services at that same location so that veterans are taken care of throughout their entire cycle of service, which doesn't end when they hang up their uniform. Veterans have given our community a ton, and they actually are very invested in seeing that our community lives and prospers and thrives for decades to come. So we need to give them the tools that they need to be part of this community and fully functional in our society. So let's make sure that when we do work for the aerospace community, that we also work for our veterans community.
Thank you. And springboarding a little bit off of that, our next question, and Katie Hillis will go to you first. How do you see the role of Congress versus that of the President in authorizing military action? Under what circumstances would you personally cast a vote to authorize military intervention? And what is your stance on our nation's current foreign military interventions? Katie Hill, 2 minutes.
Sure. So, again, coming from a military family, every single generation of my family has served in the military going back to the Revolutionary War. There is nothing that I could possibly take more seriously than how we evaluate the decision to put our troops into action or into harm's way, when they have literally signed over their lives to us. And being completely mindful of that has to be the absolute first priority. I think the current AUMF that was passed in 2001 was during a period of complete crisis right after 9/11, and it has led to the declaration of war not being necessary by Congress, and us getting involved in conflict after conflict with simply one person who has the final say, and that has to change. We have to restore Congress's power to evaluate those potential involvements and decide accordingly. That's something that, in terms of our current global conflicts, there are many that I have real problems with, including the one in Yemen that is, where we need to stop backing Saudi Arabia, just like the bipartisan action was taken, I think, yesterday to try and get us out of that. But it is one after another after another. In the Middle East, I think we've made some serious missteps over time in the Middle East with our conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq, where we haven't done the necessary rebuilding, and that's something we have to address as well. And getting the power back into the hands of Congress rather than a single president is the way that we need to do that.
And I'll just restate the question briefly here. The role of Congress versus that of the President in authorizing military action. Under what circumstances would you authorize action? And what is your stance on our country's current foreign interventions, Jessica?
So we have to remember that Congress is designed to be a check on the president's power. That's how our system works. And Congress isn't able to do that under the authorization for the use of military force that Katie referenced. And I believe that we need to repeal that so that Congress can return to its function as a check on the president. I have actually done business on 6 continents. I've done global business development around the world. That was both during and before my period as a scientist. And I can tell you something. The people of different countries don't want war with us any more than we want war with them, with the exception of a few terrorist groups. So what we need to do is take our role as a global leader very seriously. The United States government has been interfering in a lot of different regions, sometimes justly, sometimes unjustly. And Congress's role is to make sure that our interventions don't become prolonged, that we don't leave our military members high and dry for years and years in unwinnable situations. This is frankly quite terrifying to me, that we can have these endless war scenarios. And I think that what we need in Congress are people who counterbalance the hawks that we see. In fact, right now, with Pompeo assuming the position that Tillerson just had, Pompeo is a complete hawk, and he wants to go to war with Iran. So I think we really need to make sure that as a Congress, we put the brakes on when we need to. Congress needs to counterbalance whatever the president's urges are, and that is just the way the system is designed. Congress can't be a rubber stamp. The only instances that I could see myself voting for use of force is when the circumstances are beyond extenuating, when it is an extreme situation where our intervention is absolutely necessary to prevent the overthrow of a democracy or a genocide. I mean, those are the situations where I think the United States should be looking outside of its borders. But we do have to remember, we were dragged onto the global stage by a terrifically horrible war with World War I. We became a leader because of that unfortunate circumstance. And that means that our role as global leaders has to be taken very, very seriously, particularly by those in Congress.
Brian Conforto, the role of Congress versus that of the President. What circumstances would lead you to authorize military intervention, and what is your stance on our current military interventions abroad?
Yeah, there's no greater obligation of the federal government than to protect the country. And to go back to the question that Jessica's asked alone, what is our greatest national security threat? I happen to think that it's the current President of the United States. I think that Donald Trump is a threat to our national security every day he sits in the Oval Office. And Congress has the constitutional responsibility, not just right, but responsibility to provide a check on the President of the United States to make sure that they are authorizing war in the appropriate circumstances, that they are making sure that he does not put us at needless risk or the world at needless risk. I am absolutely terrified about this president going to sit in a room with Kim Jong-un. This is a person who gets blown off by a Twitter, by something that happens on Twitter when he sees a bad tweet. If Kim Jong-un insults him in that room, I have no idea what will happen. This is a man who has nuclear weapons, who has threatened the United States, and I do not trust this president to speak with him. I don't trust this president with what's happening in the Middle East. I don't trust the way he has insulted our most important allies all across this world, because it is a dangerous world out there, and we need to cooperate with allies now more than ever to make sure that we are using the best possible tools and technology. We also need to cooperate with the great technology companies to make sure we are combating the real world threats that we do face. But as long as this president is in the White House, I am concerned about our national security and will make sure that I do everything in my constitutional authority as a member of Congress to be a check on him and keep our nation safe.
Thank you. Our next question is related to Social Security. It'll go to Jess Phoenix first. Both Steve Knight and Paul Ryan, Speaker of the House, have expressed a desire for, quote, Social Security reform. Everyone likes reform. But look, in reality, especially with the trillion plus deficit they just exploded with their tax bill, their reforms would mean big cuts. How would you ensure the long-term solvency and success of Social Security, because there is wide agreement that it does need some kind of reform, perhaps not the kind that Knight and Ryan want? Just
So obviously Social Security is something that we've had in our country for several decades now, and people come to rely on it. We have had some changing times, and unfortunately, the system is broken. We do need it, though. We need to make sure that people in our society have something that they can depend on as they age or as they encounter disability. So what I think we need to do is make sure that we have people in Congress who value Social Security and actually want to fix it, rather than the same cycle that we've seen before, which is tax cuts at the expense of social programs. They'll give a big handout to corporations, and then they come back around and then attack Social Security. They attack Medicare, Medicaid. This is something that we can put a stop to by having people in office who actually value what Social Security does and do not see any sort of social programs as a threat. I would want to see a better balanced budget. So where we look for areas where we are spending wastefully and we reallocate funding, we reallocate our investments so that we are investing in Social Security, because that is an investment in our people. I would really want to see an actual bipartisan solution here. We cannot allow the tribalism that has taken over our political process to play with people's lives. That's what it's doing. And so Social Security is one of the bedrocks that made America so strong in terms of our middle class. And it's something that unless we work very hard to achieve a realistic solution, which I think, like I said, comes from cutting spending in areas that are wasteful and then reallocating that to social programs like Social Security, as well as education and healthcare, we are not going to see the reliable Social Security that a lot of people have come to depend on be an option for people in even my generation. It's just not going to be there. So this is something that we need to send people to Congress who are actually going to prioritize, and I would do that.
Brian Conforto, how would you mend Social Security so they don't have to?
I'm sure most or all of you in this room have seen Congressman Knight's famous quote where he said he thinks Social Security was a bad idea. Which is just an outrageous statement. It shows how absolutely out of touch he is with the community. I happen to think it's a great idea, maybe the best idea in American history. as we made a sacred promise to our seniors. And for decades now, we have brought millions and millions of people out of poverty, let them retire with dignity and live out their lives the way they should. Their lives with dignity and put a priority in the community and not in the biggest banks and the wealthiest people.
Katie Hill.
Yeah. Can I ask a quick question? How many of you feel totally confident in your retirement savings that it's going to be enough for your lifetime? It's a real small number. And it's getting smaller and smaller. When you talk to a generation like mine, where pensions are so rare, and the thought of saving when you can barely make your rent is for something that's going to happen 50 years down the road is just, not even on people's radars. We are going to be dependent on Social Security. We have made this promise to the people in our country, and we have to fulfill it. This is something that I saw firsthand on on people living on the streets. There was a dramatic increase in the number of homeless seniors. I had an 82-year-old woman who ended up on the streets one day, who came to our shelter. We asked her what happened. She said that, well, my husband passed away, and I've been living off of his Social Security, and the rent went up by $300 or $400, and it was nowhere near enough for her. So we do have to address reforming Social Security, but we have to be looking at increasing it, not decreasing it. And removing the cap is definitely the first start. We need to look at modest changes that are going to make the program more effective overall. There might be some administrative pieces that we can do. But fundamentally, we have got to protect our seniors. There are far too many other ways that we're failing our seniors, including not providing for assisted living, and so many people who ultimately can't do that for their families. And this is an area where, when you're talking about reforming something on a budget side, solving a deficit, you look at it from either a revenue side or an expense side. The Republicans are looking at it exclusively as an expense side, and you cannot simply solve the problem from just the expense side. You also have to increase the revenue, and the way we do that is by removing the cap and looking at other creative means so that we can retain and ultimately expand the Social Security benefits.
Thank you. Our next question is related to the issue of immigration. Our dreamers. The clock is still ticking, and no resolution is in sight from Washington. If you're on Capitol Hill, what compromises, if any, would you be willing to agree to in terms of border security so that a dreamer bill actually passes? And we'll start with Brian Kapoor.
Yeah, we have 5,000 DACA recipients in this district, and it was absolutely outrageous that this president decided to put all of them at risk for no reason, setting an arbitrary deadline of March 5th. We're lucky that the Supreme Court has kicked that so that we are past that deadline, and it hasn't completely taken effect yet. But it's outrageous that Congress didn't act. It's outrageous that Congress has not taken steps to keep families together. These are people who are American in every sense of the term, who have came here when they were a child, who are part of what makes this very community so wonderful. And we need to be there fighting for that. And we need to make sure that, as Democrats, we recognize what the most important values we have are. And to me, keeping our communities and our families together is that. So I was disappointed just a few weeks ago to see how many Democrats really dropped the ball and gave up the little leverage that they had, where they could have taken a stand instead of accepting a promise of a future maybe from Mitch McConnell, which, if we haven't figured out that you can't trust that guy by now, then you don't deserve to be in office. And so we need to use whatever tools we have available to take a stand on those issues that matter to us. And to me, keeping families in our community together, keeping our community together, that is one of those issues that you have to stand for. I won't vote for a border wall. We need to keep our community and our borders safe, but it's not going to happen by building a wall. It's not going to happen by breaking families apart. It's going to happen by making sure we put our values right up front, say who we stand with, and always fight for that.
Katie Hill.
So our first priority has to be to fulfill the promise that was made to the DACA recipients, but we also have 3.5 million people who are dreamers who would be eligible for these kinds of benefits that we need to provide opportunities for and stop them from having to live in constant fear and limbo. On top of that, we have the TPS workers, TPS recipients who we need to find protections for and ultimately move towards a pathway to citizenship overall. I would follow the lead of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which has taken the lead on this in terms of figuring out what kind of a deal is acceptable to them and to the communities that represent most closely. I would want to talk to activist groups out here and at the national level who are saying that this is where we should be going. And that ultimately, when you come to a point of a compromise, this is where we're willing to go. Because frankly, it shouldn't be a representative alone that's making that kind of a decision. It should be, we should follow the lead of the people who are so close to this issue, and that's something I would do. I've spoken with, I'm endorsed by 2 of the California members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, Jimmy Gomez and Nanette Berrigan, and both of them I've spoken to at length with about this issue. It's something that I would be a complete champion on, and that I would ensure that we could pass the most effective and immediately effective solution for the thousands of people who are left in limbo.
Jess Phoenix.
The most important thing is to get citizenship for our dreamers. I want that bar none. That needs to happen because when they receive citizenship, nobody's going to take it away. That is theirs. And so I need to vote for, as their representative too, I would need to vote for what gets them citizenship ASAP. And that means that what you can't negotiate on, and I think this is important to point out, you cannot negotiate on human rights issues. That is where we have to stand firm and never back down. When it comes to budgetary things, like funding for border security, I hate the wall, El muro es horrible, if you want to go with Spanish. I mean, it's terrible. It's a terrible idea, and it is ludicrous because it's a geological impossibility. It's asinine. So that's the most polite word I could come up with too. But if you allocate funding for a wall that literally can't be built, then you can take that allocation away. But what you can't take away is the citizenship for our dreamers. And of course, I also want to prioritize DAPA recipients as well. DAPA folks are the parents of the DACA recipients. In our community, we have over 5,000 DACA recipients alone, to say nothing of their parents. And if we remove them from our community, we'll actually lose $159 million annually in economic output. So that is a huge amount just for the 25th district right here. And also, we need that path to citizenship. I mean, my husband's mother received amnesty from President Reagan back when compassionate conservatism was a thing, when it was not a partisan sticking point and a political football. These are people's lives. So yeah, you better damn well believe I'm gonna vote however I need to make sure that our DACA recipients get their citizenship ASAP. And you know what? I'll negotiate the other crap later.
We're fired up, and the next question's on gun control.
They did this on purpose.
What additional gun control measures, if any, would you advocate for on a federal level? And I would say not just advocate for, but introduce legislation on. What do we need to do? Start with Katie Hill.
All right. Well, just today I found out that Moms Demand Action has given me the seal of approval as a gun sense candidate, which I'm very proud of. And this is because these are reforms that I have been advocating for most of my life. I grew up with guns. I'm the daughter of a police officer and a military family. They've been in my house for as long as I can remember. But as a gun owner, I can tell you with complete certainty that these are the same kinds of measures that the vast majority of gun owners want to see as well. And the only reason that they haven't been able to happen with bipartisan support is because of the undue influence of the corporate gun lobby, including the NRA. So what would I introduce and what would I support? I would support a ban on assault weapons, on bump stocks, on silencers. I would, because my dad's a police officer still, and any of those guns, any of those implements should never be used by civilians. They should never be on our streets with the possibility of use by civilian. I would support really closing every single loophole in the universal background checks, because that is really supported by pretty much every single American citizen. We have to make sure that we are raising the age to 21, because if you can't buy a beer, you certainly shouldn't be able to buy a rifle. And we have to impose waiting periods because, and this is coming from someone with a mental health background, this cooling off this waiting period has proven to be more effective than anything else at stopping somebody from either committing suicide or some other kind of a violent act, because there's this critical time when people will act impulsively, and usually that can stall things. So that's something that I would definitely want to introduce and incorporate with other mental health solutions to this crisis as well.
Jess Phoenix.
I saw something this week that took me back to the place where I was when I was 17 and learned that my friends at Columbine were killed. which is something that no kid should ever have to go through. And this jarred me because this was Tom Mauser, the father of Dan Mauser, who was 15 when he was killed at Columbine. I did student congress with him just shortly before he died. And Tom was at the Capitol helping to put shoes out to represent the number of lives lost just since Sandy Hook. And he had Dan's shoes with him. Almost 19 years later. And I'm getting emotional because this matters to me. Sorry, I'm not good at crying on cue, but I can cry apparently when I don't want to. But seeing Dan's shoes, I could only envision him in them and what he looked like. His feet were too big for his body, just like most 15-year-old boys. And I'll tell you that shows the hole that gun violence leaves in everybody it touches lives. So what I think we need to do, and what I will fight for with a ferocity that is not even matched by my passion for working on climate change, is making sure that we repeal the Dickey Amendment, that we fund the Centers for Disease Control to study this epidemic, because it isn't just mass shootings, it's suicides, it's domestic violence, and it is way too many people we know and love. And I will make sure that we ban centerfire semi-automatic rifles, make sure that we ban magazines with capacities of 6 for rifles and 10 for over 6 and over 10 for handguns. And we need to make sure that we ban the bump stocks, the silencers, that we institute a mandatory 14-day nationwide waiting period, and make sure that we actively work to keep concealed carry reciprocity from ever happening. Ever. This is not a case where we can allow states with weaker laws to legislate the laws and states with stronger laws, where we have actively chosen to protect our citizens. Oh, and by the way, never arming teachers. No more guns in schools. We have to limit the flow of guns, and that's what I'll fight for.
Yeah, I think we're all just horrified by the seemingly endless stream of massacres that come across our TV screen, that we've now almost gotten used to it, such that we have this very, well-worn process where there's shock and then outrage and then a search for explanation and then a hope that maybe our elected officials will do something, and they offer thoughts and prayers, and they offer thoughts and prayers, and absolutely nothing happens. As the corporate gun lobby maintains its control, and they continue to just push along business as usual while people keep getting killed. I've been really inspired by what's happening after Parkland. Watching these high schoolers has been amazing. Watching them speak truth to power and get out there and not be so jaded and not think that the system is broken. I was really proud to stand with a bunch of them yesterday during the walkout because we need to let these kids take charge. The adults have shown for too long that they're failing. Maybe these kids can kick us into high gear. And so maybe they can start to get some of these common sense solutions that 80-90% of the people support that will start saving lives. Of course, we need to get rid of the Dickey Amendment and get the CDC to get us the evidence about what would be the most effective. But in the meantime, yes, absolutely, we got to ban assault weapons, silencers, bump stocks. Even Donald Trump said after Las Vegas, he was going to do something on bump stocks. Well, here we are. Nothing has happened. We need to get rid of those. We need to have a waiting period nationwide, which at the very least would save 1,000 lives every single year. We need to make sure that we have universal background checks. If you are a domestic abuser, if you have mental health issues, if you're a suspected terrorist, you can't buy a gun. We need to make sure that people like Steve Knight are not passing concealed carry reciprocity. We need to make absolutely certain that we raise the age. There are just these obvious steps we can do that will save lives starting tomorrow. We just need people with the will to stand up to the NRA and start protecting our community.
So our last question is actually one from a member of our community, and it's a tragic one, and we'll go to Jess Phoenix first. Daniel from Palmdale lost his mother 5 years ago, and he was just 18 when it happened. And she died because of an opioid dependency problem. And she was not someone out there trying to find a party. This was related to chronic pain. But she had to endure from an illness, which is increasingly the case, it seems more and more. And so what would you do specifically as a congressperson to fix this problem?
So,
Specifically.
okay. That's a big problem. And like many people out here, and like Daniel, I've lost a loved one to opioid addiction. My cousin Joey died almost 4 years ago now. He overdosed, and he had been clean for 6 months. So it's, very few people I know are unscathed by it. And so I think what we really need to do is look at the scale of the problem and stand face to face with that too. There was a town in West Virginia in a 7-year period from 2008 to 2015, 3,000 residents in this town, there were over 20 million prescriptions for opioids. And I have a source on that. If you want to see it, come talk to me later. But that is an actual thing that happened. So in our communities, it's opioids, and we need to make sure that we provide treatment for people and that we have oversight for the kind of prescriptions that are being made. But what we really need to do is also address heroin, because that is a huge problem in our community. Addiction in general. So when we look at the opioid crisis, we cannot just look at the opioid crisis. We have to look at all of the addictive behaviors and the lack of treatment and resources that we have for people who are suffering and need some type of relief. Whether that's mental health care access, which I think that's part of it, whether it's affordable Medicare for all, whether it's making sure that we have enough treatment centers for our population. And these are things we have to do. And I'm actually really interested in looking at making sure that our veteran communities have access to cannabis as a potential treatment option, because it has a lot less negative side effects than opioids do. So these are issues that intersect and touch almost every single one of us. So we need, people as Congress people to look at all the available evidence on possible treatment options. And that's where I want to bring my fact-based and evidence-based policy-making views to bear. I want to see different programs, look at the successes, weigh and balance them, look at what works and what doesn't. And then I want to make sure the federal government provides funding for our community to make sure that we don't lose more people who don't need to be lost.
Brian Kafoury.
Yeah, I'm sorry to Daniel who had to go through that. I doubt there are many people in this room who have got away unscathed one way or another with this horrible epidemic. And the federal government's failing. They host a town hall and they talk about it, and Trump pretends that he cares, but then he doesn't put the resources there. I think Jess really hit a lot of the things we need. And it's just making it a priority. It's making sure that when they're talking about nationwide health care, we're actually funding it. We're making sure that every single person has it, that it includes mental health care, that it includes the ability to get in there for some innovative type solutions, which we do here in the 25th. There are some equestrian centers that are working with people dealing with opioid dependency that have had real good successes. I'd like to get more funding for that, to expand the programs and see if it can work with more people. But we need to have the education, both with people and with doctors, so they're not prescribing 20 million different prescriptions in a town of 3,000, to know what's at risk. I too would like to see us moving into, at the federal level, making marijuana available at least medically. There is good evidence that it is much less dangerous than what we are providing right now and does have medical benefits. So there are things we can do if we recognize that this is an epidemic that is killing far, far too many people and affects every single community in this country. And we need to recognize that, and we need to prioritize finding a solution for that so that nobody has to go through what Daniel has.
Katie Hill.
Yeah, so at the end of this month, I'm going to be traveling to Arizona for the day in the middle of our fundraising push to see my brother graduate from the 18 months that he's been in treatment for this exact issue. And his name is also Daniel. So it's something that has not only affected me from seeing countless friends and the people that I've worked with at PATH become addicted, and many of whom have died because of this, but it hits home when it's your own brother. That's something that my family has been struggling with for years now, that insurance does not pay for, and that has had to scrape everything possible together to make sure that my brother had the best possible treatment, including his entire college fund. So he's going to be coming out without that opportunity that his parents and grandparents had worked so hard to save up for. So it's real and it's here, and we have 1 in 11 people who are going to experience some kind of serious addiction in the entire United States. So that means there are a lot of people right here who have something, who have had something, and a lot of people, probably almost all of us, whose lives have been touched by that in some way. So it truly is a public health crisis. And the solutions are very basic. It means that we need to ensure that insurance companies are paying for high quality care. We need to ensure that that public centers for treatment actually have capacity and are adequately funded, so that when somebody finally decides that they can accept treatment or are willing to, that we have a needs. And you don't want to have somebody become lifetime addicted when you're talking about a teenager. That's why we need people who are experts at this. This is something I've been working my entire life on, my entire career on, and has impacted my family. And I know that I can help inform the way that we
Thank you.
lead the national dialogue.
Almost done, just 2 more questions here tonight. Did everyone notice what happened in Pennsylvania this week with Connor Lamb? Briefly to each of the candidates, what lessons can our party take away, or what should they take away from this apparent victory if it's not official enough? And we will start with Katie Hill.
I think the lessons that we need to take away from this are that each region is different, and a Democrat in a big city is different from a Democrat in a place like this, is different from a Democrat in a place like Pennsylvania. So we need to find people who are truly representative of those communities, who understand the nuances, and who are able to reflect that. You know, we saw Connor Lamb with stances that would have gotten him immediately kicked out, even in this district. And I think that that's important, though. But you know, at the end of the day, what matters is that we are able to get the right people in Congress who can get things done, and we need Democrats to do that. And I think that this is a time where those of us who are the most progressive, who are the most unwilling to compromise, perhaps, on our particular stances, need to look at it and say that there might be some areas that are a little different in certain communities. And just to clarify, that never is the pro-choice, pro-life issue. That's something that we cannot compromise on.
Jesse Phoenix.
I think the lesson that we need to take is that people are pissed off and they're showing up. I mean, look at this room. This is amazing. And I mean, we can actually change things by being pissed off, and not just pissed off, but passionate. You know, that's a nicer way to spin it. We have people who have never engaged in politics before paying attention and telling their friends and families. If this is your first time coming to a candidate debate, will you raise your hand? Uh-oh. Me too. So that's actually a really good number of people. See what this is doing? We know that there's a clear and present danger to our society and to the values we hold dear. So I really hope that Democrats all around the country are going to help put forward candidates who get people excited and tap into that passion and tap into what is going to turn our country, or at least our Congress, blue. Because we need that. That has to be that check on El Presidente. And we need it soon. So every single one of these special elections, just remember, and I told a bunch of scientists who were wondering how they could get involved in politics this last night, y'all need to speak up, and I mean like big time. Your voices carry so much weight and have so much power, and that may be something that's not quite getting across enough. It's always go knock doors for your candidate or for your Democratic Party. Please keep doing that. We love it. It's great. But also have the difficult conversations. Talk to your friends and your relatives, people you don't think will necessarily have views that align with yours. But ask them why they believe those things, and then see where you can find common ground. That's what we need to be doing, not just as Democrats, but as a society. So please do have those difficult conversations and make sure that you are going out and connecting with as many people face to face as possible. Because that human connection is going to outweigh whatever ridiculousness they've read on Facebook that day. I guarantee it.
Brian Ford.
Yeah, I take a similar lesson to Jess, which is that business as usual in Washington is not working. It is hurting families, it is hurting communities, and people are pissed off. And we need to tap into that energy and show that we have a better option, show that we have a better way forward, whether it is holding this president who's a threat to our country accountable, whether it is passing policies that will actually help people, Medicare for all, an immigration solution to DACA and beyond. There are so many things that we as Democrats believe in that will improve communities. And there is a hunger for people who are seeing the last, 14 months of this presidency of a united Republican government who has just launched an assault on working families, middle-class families, and lower-class families who want something different. So let's fight really hard for the next 7 months. Have those conversations at the door, make those phone calls, send those postcards, and tell people about the message that we're trying to bring. And if we do that for the next 7 months, we're going to have a really good result in the election, but that's not really the goal. What we all want is to get a representative in office who can actually start implementing these policies, who can actually start improving this community. And I think we've got an excellent chance to do that if we just harness the energy that's out there, talk about our positive message, and start improving this place.
So this is the last question before we go on to closing remarks, and it's a tough one, but let's just keep it at about 30 seconds or so. But it's one that shouldn't be tough. But there's a story recently in Politico. They went and asked Chairman Perez, what does the Democratic Party stand for? What does it mean to be a Democrat? And he had some answer, and Nancy Pelosi had another answer, and Chuck Schumer had another answer, and then ran off to do a TV interview. So my question to you, and take yourselves out of your positions as 25th district candidates, but I see 3 leaders here, and no matter who gets into office, you're going to be a leader in our party. And so if you were to knock on my door and I say, who are you and why are you here, like Mr. Admiral Stockdale, what would you tell me? 30 seconds. What does this party stand for? And we'll just start with Katie Hill.
Sure. I believe that the Democratic Party, which I've been a member of since I was 5 years old and went and decided to vote with my mom instead of my dad, but ultimately, since I was 18, is the party of the people. It's the party that cares about people, that is going to look out for the little guy. It's the party that is committed to ensuring that we're rebuilding the middle class, that we are protecting people who can't protect themselves, and that we provide a safety net for any American who falls into some kind of a hard time. Because ultimately, that's what Americans are about. We help our friends, our families, our neighbors, and that's all of us together.
Jessica.
I came to become a Democrat when I went to college and moved away from my Republican parents and realized, oh, there's a whole other world out here. Thank you, Smith College, shout out. If any of you know it, it's real liberal. So you'll learn real quickly that the world is more than just sunshine and roses. And I think, to me, that's what the Democratic Party is all about. And I look very much to Franklin Roosevelt's 4 freedoms. It's something that has stuck with me ever since the first time I visited the memorial of his in Washington. I remember standing in front of the 4 freedoms where it's carved into stone and it says freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, freedom from fear. To me, that's what Democrats are and were and always should be.
Brian Corey.
Yeah, to me it means caring for something bigger than yourself. It goes back to that golden rule that my grandpa passed down through our family, where we do unto others as we want them to do unto us. And that means providing health care for all people because it's a right. It means providing retirement security for all people because they deserve that dignity. It means keeping families and communities together with immigration reform, just in every possible way, recognizing we aren't in this alone. We are our brother's keeper, and we need to support policies that improve the community as a whole and not a smaller and smaller sliver as the other side wants to do.
We're now going to move on to our closing remarks. Each candidate will have a maximum of 2 minutes for their closing remarks. And here is your chance, audience, to clap for all the candidates, I hope, but also to each individual one upon their conclusion. After our final closing remark, please keep your places on stage, and please keep your places in your seats as we will have our final remarks from our club president here, Brian Zavala. In randomly drawn order out of a very filthy hat, Brian Caforio, please give your statement first.
Well, thank you everybody for coming here. This was really wonderful. I know there are so many different things that you could be doing on a random night in March other than coming here. But this is part of what gives me hope. That as bad as things seem each and every day when I read the news and see the next thing this president has done to try and tear us apart, it's seeing your energy, hearing your stories, and knowing that we aren't giving up, that we aren't letting him represent us as we just sit silently and let him bring us down in the world's eye. That's what gives me so much hope. So I really appreciate you being here and the club for putting this together. It has been a tough 14 months. The way we have seen an assault on women, on immigrants, on working families, on almost every different part of this community. It's been tough. And we need to get people in office who are going to fight against that, who are going to be champions for our community. I'm really proud and humbled to be endorsed by all 18 labor unions who've endorsed in this race, including the nurses and the aerospace workers and the steel workers and so many more, because I am absolutely committed to standing with working families in this community and fighting for them every single day so we can kick back against this onslaught against working families, against this corporate priority the way that Washington is right now. We need to put people first. We can improve our lives, we can save lives, and we can improve our community. So thank you for what you're doing. Let's fight for another 7 months, and then let's really start making the progress we all want. Thank you.
All right. This, again, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to the other candidates, Brian and Jess, to the organizers. This is really an incredible moment. Hopefully you've walked away or will walk away with a better sense of who we are, but I think the thing to take away from this is that this is not about us. This is not about any single one of us, because at the end of the day, we are supposed to be representatives of all of you. And we are truly building a moment of people who are standing up for the first time ever, saying that our system is broken, our country is broken, and we can be so much better, and we can do so much better, and we're demanding it. Yesterday, I marched with over 300 students from across the Santa Clarita Valley to City Hall and spoke with them about the gun safety measures that they're demanding to be in high schools. That they will not sit in school and be afraid for the rest of their lives, and they will not allow that for the next generation. We're seeing women who are standing up and saying that they need a voice, that we deserve to have more representation than 20% of the people in Congress. That's not even counting the boards and corporate leadership or anything like that. And we're seeing that trickle down to people even younger. And I think that this truly is a special moment. It's something that I am so proud to be a part of, and we can do this together. We can not only defeat Steve Knight, but we can truly change the country and our country's future. Thank you.
Jess Phoenix.
So I'm going to get a little existential on you for a second. Where are we? Right? Okay, so we're in the Chimbole Center. Okay, that was the easy answer. The more difficult answer is, as Democrats, we are currently the opposition party. And that is a very interesting place to be. We could take a couple of different routes here, one of which would be just oppose everything. Republicans suck. That's the easy route. We shouldn't be doing that. We can do better than that. As Henry Ford said, don't find fault, find a remedy. That's what we need to do. And I am not politics as usual. I'm a scientist. And I think this is the new style of politics that we're going to be seeing. You're going to see people from all different backgrounds, from retail sales, from early childhood education, janitors, farmers. You're going to see people in large numbers taking a vested interest in how their local, state, and federal politics plays out. And I sure as hell hope that they're going to run. So what we need to do, instead of just opposing things, is we need to recognize the moment we're in, not just as an opposition party, but historically. We are seeing people come into their own power. Look at the March for Science. Look at Black Lives Matter. Look at the Women's March. I mean, look at what we're seeing from the Parkland students. We are now in a moment unlike any other throughout history. And I say this as a former history major. This is unique. This is special. We need to take the energy that brought all of you here tonight, that have kept you up, arguing with people on the internet for the last couple of years, and hopefully not arguing too much. But we need to take that energy, and we need to realize that the students who are speaking out and owning their power right now are the same students in different forms as the ones who led the civil rights movement, who protested Vietnam. We can make this change. And you know what I'm going to tell you? I'm going to leave you with another quote from Simon Sinek. He's great. But he says, the next election isn't about leadership. It's about the next generation. Thank you.
And let's hear it for all of our candidates too. And let's hear it for the president of the Democratic Club of the High Desert, Brandon Zavala, will come out and say a few words. Okay?
So sorry, Katie.
Yeah.
I know it's a bad place to get between a politician and a microphone, but here I am. So first and foremost, I want to say thank you to Brian, Katie, and Jess. Give them a warm round of applause again.